Call this meeting of the working group back to order. Welcome, glad you're back. Just a reminder, your signs are welcome. We ask that you'll hold them below your chin, not above your head, so that you're blocking the view of those behind you or to your side. And frankly, we don't want you to cover your face. We want to see your smiling faces. So thank you for being here in committee. Welcome back. Any preliminary business, personal orders? Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. I have the honor of introducing to you our honored guests that we have today. We were just discussing, it's a working group, so we feel formal in here, but it is a little bit more casual. Is that a good word to use? Informal. But I would like to ask, we think it would be good energy if y'all were all sitting up here. So I'm going to, as I call your name, just come on up. First of all, this is for our district leaders' input on this issue we're looking into. So Matt Hickson, you are with, and I'll let you introduce yourself when you get up here. You are with Hawkins County as the Director of Schools. Thank you. Dr. Marlon King, Jackson-Madison County School Superintendent. Thank you for being here. Tony Williams, Memphis Shelby County in the house. And you are the interim superintendent, correct? And then we have Hank Clay. He's Chief of Staff with Metro Nashville Public Schools. And let me see. That's the last name I have. All right. Well, thank you all again for coming and helping us learn. And so if you will, again, even though I said it, if you don't mind stating your name and who you're with for the record.
Thank you, Ms. Moody. Matt Hickson, Director of Schools for Hawkins County.
Good afternoon, Marlon King, Director of Schools, Jackson-Madison County.
Tony Williams, Interim Superintendent of Memphis Shelby County Schools.
Hank Clay, Chief of Staff for Metro Nashville Public Schools.
So I don't know if y'all have thought about how you want to start. If you have your thoughts about Go ahead.
Well, if you don't mind, let me set the stage for you, because I want to correct, I think, what some people have as a misperception. There's a lot of people, including the folks in this audience, who think we need to cut education funding. There is no word in any document, and I don't think any plan from any member of this working group to cut $1 of spending. There is discussion about what comes with federal dollars that we receive, and what we're looking at are we not only getting the bang for the buck, but what kind of onus comes on the state when we receive those federal dollars. What do we, frankly, then pass down to you, and then what do we pass down to those local schools? It is not about cutting, trimming $1. $1 here is $1 here. Obviously, if we said we're not going to take money from the federal government then the onus would be on us to replace those funds. So it's not about cutting programs in any way, shape, or form along those lines. I just wanted to set that up. So as you make your remarks, it's really about what does the federal dollars that go into your schools, what does it take? What we're looking for is what does it take for you to comply to receive those fundings? Matt, I'm sorry, and I'm looking at you because, folks, he's from my district, so.
Well, thank you, Senator Lundberg, and everybody that invited us to share in providing input on federal funding for our school systems. I represent Northeast Tennessee this afternoon, and more importantly, rural school systems, hopefully from across the state. We have a working budget of roughly $70 million in Hawkins County, just shy of that. 10% of that represents all of our federal funding, so roughly $7 million goes to our schools out of those federal funds for specific purposes to assist students that need additional help beyond what our local dollars and state dollars can provide. So I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding how we use those funds, how they make it directly to the school site to hit and target specific student needs, And what, if anything, if those were to disappear, what types of services we would need to account for if that were the case.
If you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a couple questions before we move on. Of the $7 million you have, how many buckets does that go into? Can you drill down?
The larger buckets, we have Title I, of course, Title II, III, and our IDEA funds are the biggest buckets that we utilize.
Do you compile information on staffing to make certain that you're dealing appropriately with Title I, II, III, IDEA?
Yes, sir. We do that in a variety of ways. Of course, you know that with title funds, we utilize, and I'm sure most systems utilize a survey, an interest and a need survey relative to those federal funds from each school site. So we make sure that we have needs specific to each school site and how they're servicing students in our county, which is roughly 500 square miles, different demographic groups, different needs, and making sure that those needs surveys dictate how we get those funds directly to the school sites. We prioritize those first, anything that directly touches students, and then what's left, we look at support roles from either the central office, such as coaching, mentoring, resources that we can aim at some of the school sites that may not be able to do that on their own. So first, as a priority, through that needs assessment and those surveys, we tackle those issues and make sure the money gets directly to the school sites.
Okay. Questions? Senator Hensley, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And when you get those funds, do they all come through the state and state funding, or is that separate funds you get, or are those federal funds all just mixed in with the money you get from the state?
No, sir. We have a separate process for dealing with the federal funds. We have a program supervisor, federal program supervisor that manages those funds as they come and are available to us. Of course, we utilize the E-Plan for our state funding and for any dollars coming from the state. But our federal funding is separate because it comes with different sets of guidelines and rules, things you can and can't do, and things that you can spend the money on and things that you cannot spend the money on and use as supports.
You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, but that money is separate for each one of those entities, like the IDEA money, the Title I money, the money for the school lunches. All of those are separate.
Yes, sir, correct. And they are treated as separate. We have somebody that oversees the federal programs. We have somebody that oversees the school lunch program. We have folks that oversee special needs and make sure that those are spent correctly in accordance with the federal guidelines and mandates.
And the school lunch funding, that's a reimbursement type system, how you pay for that. You report how many meals you have and then get reimbursed for that, correct?
Yes, sir, largely, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions before we move on? So, Representative Reagan, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a point of clarity, you said you treat the funds separately. I'm not quite sure I heard this correctly. Does that include the pass-through funds from the state? Are they identified as federal dollars as well?
Anything that's identified as federal in those buckets that I mentioned earlier, Title I, Title II, Title III, IDEA, school lunch program, have to be dealt with separately and following the federal mandates.
So that's true whether it's direct or pass-through? Just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Superintendent, how long have you been at Hancock County?
I'm in
Hawkins County, I'm sorry.
This is my 5th school year.
Your 5th school year. And
Yes.
before that, what was your?
I was in Southern California as an assistant personnel superintendent.
Okay, so you're new, relatively new to the area.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, thank you.
Representative, you're recognized.
Yes, and thank you for being here. You mentioned that there is a federal program supervisor, and I took that to mean that that's a single person, one personnel, and then you mentioned a school lunch supervisor that takes care of the federal regulations, and then also special needs specifically. So are those 3 full-time individuals? Or do they have other responsibilities, or are those specifically to oversee the federal programs?
Great question, Mr. Slater. They are funded, split funded. So our federal programs supervisor is also my assistant superintendent, assistant director, but her primary role, to the tune of 90% of her job and how she's funded, is to oversee the federal funds. And then there's a split of the other individuals as well, based on how much time they spent overseeing and administering the federal funding, as well as local funds relative to their programs.
And then do you receive, is that locally funded? In other words, those personnel, are there federal dollars specifically to cover the cost of those personnel?
There are in some cases, like our federal programs supervisor, that income does come from the federal dollars.
Okay.
That portion of her income that she spends relative to the time she spends on that task.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chairman.
By the way, I failed to mention that Representative Hill also represents you as well. So, Shirley? I'm sorry. We'll keep moving?
Okay, sounds great. So I'll give you a bit of context. I'm in my 13th year as a superintendent, and this is my third district. I've served in the rural districts and now in kind of a larger district in Jackson-Madison County. And so in thinking about the supplement of these funds that have offered some of the things that we've done in those various districts, I think are important to consider. So I'll give you just my limited thoughts because I don't have all the context around what would be in lieu of if we didn't have federal dollars, so if that's okay with you. Working in the rural context, and even in my current context, one thing I want to highlight is using the supplement of these funds have really allowed me to not burden our funding body with requesting additional funds to maintenance of effort. We've been able to strategically budget and supplement in ways to provide additional support to students. And I'll qualify that with, in several of the districts that I've served, we have had high priority schools in these districts. And the need is very different, and it's a great need in these areas. And one of the things that I want to share is that these dollars have allowed us to supplement where we wouldn't have been able to provide the support that the families and students need to improve. And what I'm excited about is the fact that these schools, and not all of them, but these schools that struggled the most were schools that made improvement and moved out of a category which is a category that's considered a high priority. And having that to offset the burden has been huge for us, and being able to make certain that we are leveling the playing ground to make sure that, as the State Department says, all students mean all students. And so I think it's very critical in the context of understanding the supplement. And let me share also something else with you all. In West Tennessee, you all are familiar with the new development of Blue Oval City and what we have to offer the region with our students in terms of workforce. And workforce for us has been very critical with some of the programs we have initiated. And when I look at our budget in terms of our general purpose budget, 141, and I also look at the supplement budget in 142, the dollars that we get out of that, it's allowing us to prepare the workforce and supplement that, which is really critical, and also preparing our students and families for a quality of life that might be different from some that had. I'm going to stop there.
Dr. King, can I ask you a question? Sure. Let me reshape your thoughts, because I appreciate the programs and what you're doing. It sounds great. But I think, again, kind of as I was setting up this discussion, we were talking about this is not cutting. So
Right.
if you would imagine, just like you're doing, as you told us, you're imagining what you would do without these funds.
Right.
Let's imagine that you have 100% of those funds. You
Okay.
no longer have, you no longer mandated to require, to fill out the forms for the federal government. You do not have to do the reporting for the federal government. You now have greater freedom to do what you want with that without the federal government. Frankly, we're trying to figure out what are the strings that the federal government is putting on those dollars. We're not talking about taking away the dollars. We're talking about taking away, frankly, those strings and what can the state potentially do more effectively. So how would that impact what you just talked about?
Yeah. So I would like to offer this, and I think I prefaced my message with, I don't know what the alternative is in lieu of the fund. So in my 13th year of receiving these funds, I guess one question would be for me is sustainability from the state level. So how sustainable will this be when I think long term, because this is all I've been able to depend on for the past 13 years. And so if I get down the road 5 years and the metric of funding changes, then that puts me in a position where we have to think differently, or we have to approach our funding body to support us, to supplement in the areas that we would need to continue to make improvement.
If that was not the issue.
If
Because we are dealing with that, funding changes continually from the federal government, obviously from the state. We switch from BEP to TISA, so those changes take place. So taking out that aspect of it, if tomorrow you have every dollar that you were expending still exists, and it's going to exist for the next 50 years, however long we could, what would it mean to you if you took away all those strings? You
Oh,
didn't have to deal with
absolutely.
that.
You know, without strings attached, you know, it's always having that autonomy to do the work freely, or without demands and oversight that cripple you from doing the work. I mean, it's always a plus. I guess that's what I would offer.
Tell me the size budget you deal with.
192 million, and probably 56 of that, not including 143 in cafeteria funds, not included.
Okay, so 192. And do you have a number approximately of what's federal funding of that?
56.
56
And,
million.
and that's not with a food service 143.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Sorry. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all for being here. I really appreciate that. Are there any strings that the state require for the money that you receive?
Absolutely.
There are?
For state dollars?
Yeah.
We do have requirements with things that we have to comply with.
You have to comply with conditions and rules at the state.
Correct.
What about local?
Not as much as state level.
Not as much as
Yeah,
state.
but we,
So you
there are
have
compliance
strings, you have strings with
restrictions.
state dollars, you have strings with
Yeah.
federal dollars.
Yeah.
So there's strings with any money that you get, pretty
Correct.
much, or attachments or
Correct.
requirements, okay. So, I know, sir, I'm sorry, I didn't get to ask this earlier, but you spoke of the IDEA dollars. What is the major difference between what the state current code is in regards to safeguards and protections for families with IDEA? Are there any distinguishing differences?
Between federal and state requirements for
Correct.
special needs? No, sir.
None? Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Other questions? So, all right. You're recognized.
Thank you, Dr. King. And congratulations on 13 years. And it sounds
I don't
like
know if that's congratulations.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
So you had mentioned having some success with improving high priority schools. And you had, what I inferred was that it was in different districts. So could you share with us a little bit of what you believe to be the success of improving those high priority schools? What are those ingredients? What's the secret sauce that you've had in these other districts?
And even in the current district, I would say the secret sauce is having high quality instruction in classrooms, which will require you to have the right personnel. And with federal dollars within those schools with high needs, we have been able to implement a differentiated pay structure to offer to those who are working with students with the most need, which is definitely a benefit. Not only that, being able to offer additional programs, whether those programs are before school or after school, have been other initiatives that have allowed us to give students that extra dose of instruction to support learning. I would say, in addition to that, the funds provide opportunities for professional development. And we know that when you provide strong training for your teachers, you're going to see stronger outcomes from students. And so those are a few things that we have done. And I will say, this has happened in every district, just not two, but all three, both of the rural and even including Jackson and Madison County school system, where I've been able to leverage these dollars and not having to burden our general funds to support that. But so I'll stop there.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. And congratulations on being able to move those schools forward. I know it's very tough when you have a high priority school to get those off that list. Yeah. So congratulations on that. I'm a little bit, I was surprised when Hawkins County, if I understood it correctly and I jotted down, was 10% was federal funds on a $7 million budget. And I'm not sure that I heard correctly as far as the percentage. I think you gave it in dollar amounts. Do you have a percentage of federal funds for Jackson County where you are now?
I would say we will be around 11% with federal funds.
Okay.
11,
okay.
12%.
Very good. Thank you. That clarifies that. Thank you.
I think I know I've got Senator White on the list, but 10% I want to check because you had a budget of 192 million and 56 million in federal funds.
And that didn't include cafeteria funds.
That did not include, so that number is larger.
It's just a tad, not a significant number.
I'm not a math guy, but
Let's
if I've
see.
got 192 million and 56 million in federal funds, that's at least 25. That's over 25%.
No, well, then that number's off.
And that, I think,
Yeah, that number
Representative
would be
Slater, that's
off.
where you're going.
Yeah, that number would be off.
So,
Yeah.
and I
But
actually, I
but
was
I can
going to
get
come
that
back
number
to
for
that.
you. I can get the exact number for you.
Okay. Senator White?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And can I go back to the first witness and ask the same questions? You stated you had some employees at your central office that are dedicated to the federal funding and filling out the paperwork and all that. How many staff do you have at the central office?
Total at the central
Total,
office?
yes.
Inclusive of receptionists and secretaries and
Anyone in the central office, yes.
I would say we're, off the top of my head, probably 45-ish across maintenance, special needs, school nutrition, personnel, my office, and that would be probably pretty close.
Okay, so really you have, I believe you stated around, 2 or 3 employees that are just dedicated to the federal funding. Is that out of your roughly 45 employees?
We have 3 supervisors, and in addition to that, there are support personnel that also help oversee that. For example, our federal programs supervisor has an assistant that works with her that looks at EL and homeless students and further breaks that down into those requirements as well.
So roughly, I mean, I don't have to, is on average, how many of that average 45 you have there is dedicated to federal funding?
I would say 5 or 6 would be a good answer.
Okay. And how many teachers, EAs, support staff that are actually in the school that are with children on a daily basis would this funding affect?
We have roughly 150 plus instructional assistants throughout the county of roughly 1,100 employees. That includes classified and certificated. Certificated teachers, we're just under 500. So for those 500 teachers, we have roughly 63 federally funded instructional assistants.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'd like to ask the next gentleman that just testified as well, Dr. King, how many in your central office is dedicated to the federal funding, filling out the paperwork, getting all the stats, all that kind of stuff from your central office?
We have one full-time supervisor and an administrative assistant to support.
Okay. And about how many central office staff do you have?
Under federal programs.
Or just in general? I mean, what's your percentage of, like, it takes a federal to fill out? I mean, you said you have one and one to fill out the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
Out of how many that work at central office?
I'll have to get that exact number for you.
Okay.
I'm pulling some numbers also, so I'll look for that as
And
well.
then how many, like say, certified teachers, EAs, that's actually in the schools that have day-to-day contact with children and help children, does this money allow you to hire?
Okay. And I'll pull that for you.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you. Other questions before we move on? Ms. Williams?
So thank you all. I will take a little bit of a different approach. This is the first time Memphis Shelby County Schools has come before you, so I will have a prepared statement, and then we can become a little bit more conversational. Is that okay for you? All right, so esteemed members of the state legislature, I'm excited to be here today. I stand before you not only as the superintendent of Memphis Shelby County Schools, but a proud advocate for our remarkable students, our dedicated educators, and our supportive families, and a graduate of Memphis Public Schools. So often dismissed as a mere numbers, our district funds represent far more than financial assistance. And I'll start back to say that I'm the interim superintendent. It has been a year and a half, still counting. Some days I lose track on what day I am on the job. But previously before, the chief financial officer of Memphis Shelby County Schools, and also one of our municipal school districts as well. So I come with a different perspective, but often dismissed as mere numbers. Our district funds represent far more than financial assistance. They are the lifeline that fuels the innovative teaching programs that I'll talk a little bit about, lifts the most vulnerable students, and provides supports for those battling food insecurity. And these funds are not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they're hope. So Memphis Shelby County Schools, just to give you a little bit of our profile, encompasses a dynamic network of 211 schools, catering to a diverse population of 86,000 K-12 students, 5,200 pre-K students, and 19,400 charter school students that we serve as well. We are committed to providing quality education for all of our students, regardless of their background and circumstances. And because we're on the topic of federal funds, I know these funds follow sort of our population of students, so I want to break that down for you as well. We probably serve a high population of students with unique needs. So we have 13,000 students that are English language learners. We serve over 14,000 students with disabilities, approximately 13% of our student population. In the last couple years, our homeless population of students have doubled. So 60% of our students are economically disadvantaged, one of the higher districts in the state of Tennessee. The state of Tennessee serves approximately 30% of economically disadvantaged students. And I reiterate that Memphis Shelby County Schools serves around 60% of economically disadvantaged students. So federal funding, it plays currently, because we're on current basis here. So federal funding plays a role that provides supplemental services and programs to address those specific needs for those students. Our district receives over $274 million in federal funds to support students between 18 to 20% of our annual operating budget. The title funds are the highest or largest recurring allocation annually, at around $92 million that supplements the educational opportunities for our students that live in high poverty areas such as Memphis and Shelby County. So we use these funds for enhancement, as Dr. King stated, around the school-based programs and services. They support academic enrichment along with English language learners, neglected youth, professional development for teachers and principals and school leaders. The second largest recurring allocation is the nutrition funds. In the fight against hunger, federal funding provides meals to our students with $89 million of federal funds allocated to the food nutrition program. We're able to provide 2 meals each day for our students. For example, we have food that we receive on a weekly. Some of these students wouldn't have an opportunity for food if not for our food nutrition program. And so hunger and food instability have a devastating impact on our child.
James, I don't mean to stop you for a moment, but
Yes, sir.
if you want to apply and continue doing this, I'm trying to be respectful. I hope you will be respectful of us and our guests as well. So please. Sorry.
Yes, sir, and I'll wrap up shortly here. But just wanted to say that with the students and the basic needs that are unmet, such as food, it's unreasonable sometimes to expect that our students to learn when they come to school hungry. And so that supports our food nutrition program there, just as a recap. We also, and I pulled large buckets out of our federal funding, but we also receive Head Start funds of around $29 million that supports over 3,200 early childhood education and comprehensive services. They provide wraparound supports for students and families, and it also includes just really looking at our population. It supports families and helps them to connect them to other resources as well. So despite some of the challenges that Memphis face, I know that we often hear some of the challenges in my hometown, but Memphis Shelby County schools with those challenges have demonstrated remarkable growth over the last 2 consecutive years. We've been designated as a level 5 school district, and I want to just kind of take an opportunity to definitely, you know, with our teachers, our educators that are looking, I just want to say that I'm proud of them for the hard work coming out of the pandemic. It has been a hard time for us all during this pandemic, but we've learned that the level 5 designation, we want to continue forth with that. And so just with our commitment to growth, we've yielded these tangible results. Our graduation rate has also increased steadily over the last couple years, and we've expanded learning opportunities with some of these funds and expanded some of our AP and dual enrollment courses as well. So funding for students, no matter the origin, I'm not merely a number on the spreadsheet, right? I'm an old finance bean counter here, but I want to say it definitely provides strategic and moral investments that ensures that our students are set up for success in Tennessee and nationwide. So I'll take an opportunity for questions now. I wanted to state that because Memphis hasn't come, but I am coming to support on behalf of Memphis Shelby County Schools in Memphis and Shelby County.
Well, I'm going to start, if you don't mind, the same question I asked Dr. King.
Okay.
If you did the same thing with your old CFO hat on and
Okay.
said dollars are the same wherever, if they're coming from here, I've still got the same amount of dollars. But if I have no longer the federal strings attached, I have, quote, the state strings, but those are really to continue those programs. Would you consider that this is something that gives you more?
So this is
Less
what I
flexibility.
would consider, even having conversations when we were transitioning from the BEP model to TISA model. I'm one gal that loves to count dollars in advance, so I would love to see a sustainability plan. I think that Dr. King had a great point to say that, you know, without having all of the information in the years to come to really have a full picture, sir, it would be hard to kind of weigh in without all of the information. And I know that things change, but your body only appropriates year to year. So with commitments that we will be planning for the students in their lives and our education and our educators, it would be hard to kind of weigh in on that without that funding plan, sir.
And I get that. I guess I'm just trying to be as current because none of us can predict 5 years out. We don't know what's going to happen with AI, virtual reality, that we may no longer
That
need
is
buildings.
fair.
We can just put on headsets and, it's tough for us to forecast out that far. So with what we have right now, thoughts?
I would say that I would love for the state to provide some options for us. I think that, you know, I gave an overview for the population of the students that we serve. I'm a bet on students always and their abilities, but I want to be able to count those dollars, sir, out of respect. That's my response.
Thank you. Representative Reagan, you recognize her.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To your point that you mentioned earlier, do you, if you do not have to take into account those quote-unquote strings from the federal government, would you see an increase in your flexibility on how to allocate those dollars at the local level?
Well, as stated before, so I've been on both sides of the aisle here at tying out funds, late being on the phone with the State Department, trying to understand how to meet our maintenance of effort. I do believe there is a subset of rules in state, local, and federal, and sometimes when I compare just with my old hat, as stated before, there is a consistency across the board that doesn't really look any different. So even with the State Department, we have to be monitored annually through just working with the State Department in those funds. Same similar situation with the federal funds.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. As it turns out, though, many of the state requirements are simply mirrors of the federal requirements because they threaten to take money away from us if we don't.
Okay.
So the question that is on the table is if the state were able to give you more flexibility, would you be able to use that with those, not changing the dollar amounts?
Okay.
What would that mean to you?
I would definitely, you know, when there's no flexibility in some of the funds, I think that can bring issue. But like I said, I would love for the state to roll out a plan and for me to give an answer on all the details and information, sir. And that's kind of where I stand as a finance person. I always like to kind of understand what I'm signing up for.
Mr. Chair, one follow-up. Thank you. The flip side of that coin, though.
Yes, sir.
Flexibility assumes the reduction and obstructions that are there now. Do you see the possibility, again, assuming the same number of dollars, if these strings were relaxed or done away with, do you see things that you have to do now that you wouldn't have to do?
Well, I think that for the most part on the state and the federal side, they have been mirrored. And so I would definitely love to take that question and get back with you just to make sure I do intimate research on what the specifics are. But for the most part, I think our districts are accustomed to responding to the state as it relates and mirrors to the federal government. So for us, I mean, it's just something that we've always been accustomed to doing. So if you know, if with respect, I could take that opportunity to do additional research and provide you with an answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions, members? Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been mentioned a couple of times about sustainability, which I think is a reasonable request and a genuine concern when you're talking about changing a potential funding model. Could you speak to and help us understand the average length of your funding as it sits now, you know, from the local, the state, federal grants, et cetera? You know, could you speak to that?
Sure. I'll start with the state of Tennessee. As you know, definitely any opportunity to receive additional resources for students is a proud and happy one at Memphis Shelby County Schools because we serve students with unique needs. And so my understanding with the state formula is that we've transitioned from a BEP to TISA model. I don't know that I take a position here on that model, but I more or less I understand that it's an annual appropriation that is funded through this body. There have been commitments around salary raises to get teachers to $50,000 because my teachers are still asking me every day where I am, and I know that's a future plan of the state. But definitely, I understand it's an appropriation based on your bodies, right? In terms of the local, which we're funded at Memphis Shelby County Schools with our county commission, a local body, funding body, and there is a maintenance of effort that is typically followed based on our enrollment. And our county has definitely, through even the pandemic and the fluctuations that we all have struggles at this table for nationwide, school districts, definitely that funding level has been held. For the last, I want to say 4 to 5 years, but don't quote me there. So that's state, local, and then for federal as well is based on our economically disadvantaged population. So I can expect a change each and every year if I'm looking at the unique needs of our students that we're serving. But at Memphis Shelby County Schools, sir, our needs change and fluctuate, and so we're seeing incremental increases based on our needs of our students with federal funds. Hopefully that answers your question, sir.
It does.
Okay.
if there were and I'm sorry to ask hypotheticals, but
Yes, sir.
we're learning together. If there were a state program that came along that mirrored, the federal grant programs that had a potential incremental increase, or let's say it met the same timetable, but it was the funding was state dollars and federal, would it make a difference?
I don't know with all the information. What I can commit to you all is if you give that information for us to kind of take it and study it, then we can be more sound in providing you with a response based on data and information and facts, if that's okay, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Representative Slater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your work in Memphis, and
Yes, sir.
thank you for coming by my office
Yes, sir.
earlier this year. That was I enjoyed meeting you and speaking with you, and I need to get out to Memphis. I keep
Yes.
on threatening to get out there.
We talked about barbecue for all.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes,
There you go. Very good. Let me change gears just a little bit, because when I talk to district leaders back in my district about specifically school lunches, what I often hear is that there tends to be a lot of waste.
Okay.
And so I want to see children fed.
That's right.
But what I hear continually is I end up hearing about waste, because this is not my words. This is what I hear from school folks. And I've not been in school nutrition. Is that the meals that are prepared based on federal regulations are things that the kids don't want, and so they get it on their tray and then it goes in the trash. Have you heard that? I'm just trying to see if there's any consensus there that there is waste. And I think we could probably, I don't know if everyone would want to concede this, but there always tends to be inefficiencies in government, whether it be at the federal level or the state level or the local level. And maybe that's because there's inefficiencies in our own budget sometimes. That's just kind of our human nature.
Okay.
But as we think about waste, what are you hearing from school nutrition? Is there any credence to that?
So I'm a superintendent that goes to talk to students a lot. And so I think with school nutrition, there's a lot of sodium items that, there's regulations in our food products that we have to serve that aligns with USDA guidelines. However, in looking at the opportunities within our school program, I don't see it as a box, right? So I've taken an approach to challenge my school nutrition team to say that I want students to make sure that when they come to school, because I just stated that a lot of our kids, this is their only meal. And so what we've done is we've taken an opportunity over the summer to do a tasting program for our students where they come in and they sample to make sure that they can give us feedback immediately on what to order. And I've also expanded our operations team to ensure that when we're preparing meals, there is a prepare fresh and then there's a fresh, so giving students multiple options. But as it goes back to your specific question around waste, so number one, making sure that the food tastes good, right? There are more options than just keeping our students in a box. So that I do believe the guidelines for USDA, you can go and ask questions and make sure that you're not taking a direct, just tailored approach to following the guidelines to the T of making sure that food doesn't taste good. I think there's an opportunity to bring vendors in to give you options that you're buying. So that's number one. Number two, our team has a food and offer serve. So they may offer, instead of just saying, I want to do chicken nuggets a day, my understanding is they offer three options for the population of the students so that we're not wasting food. But, and I'll be honest with you, just because of who I am and my background and my finance background, there's always an opportunity in every single organization to improve efficiencies, right? We don't ever run away from that, but I think that's what we all do as all bodies. We look each year in our budgets, we plan, and as we know that resources are sometimes getting tighter, we look around to ensure that we don't have a lot of waste in the budget, and I think that Memphis Shelby County Schools is no different than any other organization. We're going through a cycle now where we're taking and sitting down with every program to say, hey, how can we do this different but still serve students the same way? Yes, sir.
Other questions before we move on? Mr. Clay?
Good afternoon, Chair. And Chair, thank you very much for having me.
Is your microphone on?
It is. Can you hear me?
Okay. You might want to just scoot it up a little closer to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Is that better? Yes. All right, I'm Chief of Staff for Metro Nashville Public Schools, and I appreciate what the wonderful superintendents have shared. And you've heard a lot of information yesterday and today. You'll hear a lot more. So I have 3 main points that I'd love for you to take away from our presentation. One, this funding, and recognize what you're saying, but this funding is vital to MNPS's most vulnerable students. This federal funding provides extra supports for students who need resources to support learning and provides protections for those students. We see this federal funding as some of our most strategic resources that we can use to experiment with without using state and local funds, to research whether the funds are providing the evidence that we need to increase student achievement, and then that helps us to make more strategic investments with our state and local funds. Second, the feds have set the gold standard for transparency and direct impact on students. And so a lot of our discussion about the strings attached, the amount of people that it takes to oversee it, is because we want to be really accountable for where these funds go. And we also do that with our state and local funds as well. But even the Comptroller's Office, they use the Yellow Book from the U.S. Government Accountability Office. This is the gold standard for transparency. Also, long before TISA, long before we've been doing student-based budgeting for about a decade at MNPS, federal funds have been going to schools, to students, based on student need for a long time. And so when you think about Title, it is going to the students who need those specific resources, and I think that's really important. Additionally, the federal government requires a lot of family input, and that's valuable. It's because of those federal regulations that we have families come and comment on school improvement plans, et cetera. So they help to decide how their schools use the Title I resources. All right, and then the final point, and I think goes to a lot of the questions that you're asking, is, we ask that if there's money on the table for education, that it's additive to the education funding. There's this term of art with the federal that is apropos here is supplement, not supplant. So it's really important that when we deal with most of these federal resources, that they go to be in addition to what the state and local governments use. And so if there's funding on the table to replace these federal dollars, we would welcome that, but ask that it be in addition to, because our students deserve it. We at Metro Nashville Public Schools, under Dr. Battle's research leadership, our board chairs here and our board member, Berthina Nabaya McKinney and Rachel Ann Elrod, under their leadership, we've really tried to restructure, not just talking about dollars for dollars' sake, because that leads to endless arguments, but instead talk about what we're going to expect to achieve with our students, the strategies that we feel like will help us get to that point, and then talk about what's needed to be able to achieve those strategies. So I'll leave you there and be able to answer questions that you have.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Hensley, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So some of the same questions that was asked some of the others about the strings being attached. If you received the same amount of money, do you think you would be able to have more flexibility and could actually still have the same accountability, but do you think you would have more flexibility doing different things, teaching your students, if you didn't have the federal strings attached?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Frankly, I hope that we have a moral responsibility to spend it in much the same way. I mean, these dollars are going to our homeless students. They're going to our students who are learning English for the first time. They're going to our students living in poverty, our students with disabilities. I hope that we'll have the moral obligation to do the same thing. I can speak for our administration. We care about the students. We would do much of the same thing. I don't know what would happen in a future time, and it's hard to answer that hypothetical.
What percentage of your funds is federal funds?
According to the state education report card, about 11.8%. That's fluctuated some with the influx of ESSER dollars that you've heard a lot about, but 11.8%.
And your total budget is what?
Our total budget, our total operating budget is $1.2 billion, and then the federal dollars will be on top of that.
On top of that?
Yes, sir.
And the federal dollars are how much?
About 233 million for federal, plus about, I think, 54 for our nutrition fund.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Reagan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like a question to address all of you. We have a representation here from rural school districts, from urban school districts, one from the eastern side, and more than one on the western side. So really what I'm going to ask is a compare and contrast kind of question. The Metro Nashville, I think, has 90 schools in their district. Is it
169.
169, thank you. We have some, like Stewart County, with one elementary, one middle school, and one high school. We even have a district with a single school. So the comparison piece of this puzzle is that the federal requirements, when they give money, from what I have reviewed, offers very little flexibility in that arena. So I would like for each one of you to comment, please, on how you see the flexibility piece as it goes from Mountain City, which is a very rural portion in eastern Tennessee, all the way to the Memphis area, and the idea that we have a lot of counties with diverse needs. Please, give me a comment.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. You're right. There are a lot of diverse needs, but these funds are based on the actual student needs. So it's based on if a kid is living in poverty, if a kid has a disability, et cetera, what funding should that kid be given to support their education. I'd like to think that we're very similar in Tennessee across where we are different, where there are different needs. I think the federal funding actually supports that because you have the ability to tailor it based on the data at your school, what the parents tell you, what the administrators tell you at the school, with support from those in the support hub, central office, and the state and the feds.
All right, so Mr. Clay is actually spot on. So one thing that's different about the federal funds is we have over 214 schools and charter schools included. Each school leader has an opportunity to complete what's called a school improvement plan, where they go through, review their data, and actually what's different about these funds is the school leader has the first input to submit directly to the state for approval. And so I want to say that gives autonomy to the school leader who's definitely in that building, looks at that student every day, looks at that staff, and understands the unique needs of that community. So that's an opportunity that I would say that may be positive because they have to do that data review, have to sit down through a timeline. Like you said, he has to go through a parent review as well, where they have to give input on the funds, and it makes it comprehensive. So that's one thing that I will say that's different about the federal funds for the school improvement plan process.
I think I would offer two strands, and it's talking about gap in achievement and gap in resources when you think about one part of the state to the next part of the state. And what one physical capacity or strength in one area might be totally different, while these dollars right here offer an opportunity for us to bring that gap closer together so that we can have strong families, strong kids.
I don't have much to add other than to say that the disparity between county-run systems, city systems, the areas in which the schools are populated, and the needs of the population dictate what how we service them and how we move forward. What one may term as creative, another that's looking at our federal guidelines and mandates and state guidelines and mandates may term as pushing the boundaries. I think, but regardless, our moral obligation is to meet, to identify and to meet those student needs. One thing that comes to mind, other than the disparities between county, city systems, metropolitan, rural systems, we're all there to serve students. We're all there to hit the needs as we're presented them. But I think if the state has money that they are considering maybe putting into or supplementing or supplanting the federal funds, would we ever consider being able to truly close the gap between those that are poor and don't have the means unless they get federal money or additional resources because they have a lack of ability to raise local revenues compared to those around them, versus those that have the ability to have those extreme revenues? TISA has helped. TISA is a step forward for most systems, not for all. There are some that were flat funded or reduced funded depending on what was happening there with the calculations, but we benefited from that. But I will say that it does not close the gap with those around us, because those around us are able to put 60-70% of local funds on top of what they're getting from the state and federal entities, and we don't have that means and infrastructure in Hawkins County. I speak for Hancock, Granger, and others around us that are in the same boat. So I think that if there is a potential for evening the playing field or closing that gap, there may be avenues other than looking at just replacing federal funds as a whole, and maybe looking at what our rural or poorer or districts that have the biggest needs can get additionally from the state, if we're talking additional revenues that you're willing to offer.
Thank you. Senator Ackberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly agree with that sentiment. If we have extra funding, let's give it to the schools instead of rejecting funds we already receive. But I have some questions, and this is for the group as a whole, because, we keep hearing there are strings attached to this federal funding. It is a burden on our local school districts. It is a burden on our state government. What strings have you all found attached to these funds that have made it more difficult for your school districts to utilize them, if any?
I'm not picking on anyone, just want to see if anyone jumps up. So.
It's okay. That's an answer. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is if you all, the funding source doesn't come from the federal government, it comes from the state, and you all have to continue to perform the services that you are required to perform, like paying teacher salaries and teacher development and things you have to do around your schools. Without the strings, would you change how you spend your money? Would you, decide you're not going to provide these services for the kids and for the teachers that are previously kind of required under these federal funds? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'll give a real honest answer to that question. The existing funding is pulled so thin in education that we're putting Band-Aids over every single element deserves more funding to be able to achieve the strategies we have for our students. And so if all of the funding were adequate, that the federal funding was truly additive to put the literal cherry on top, then I wouldn't worry as much about that question. But they are pulled so thin. And so I worry what would happen to some of our most vulnerable students, where this money is saying we're dedicating it to them, if we also have issues with our school infrastructure or issues around adequacy of teacher pay, et cetera. There's just so many needs that any additional dollar is going to go towards that.
Thank you.
Ma'am, could I weigh in on that as well? I
Yes,
think infrastructure is a huge concern as well. So we're talking about environments that are safe, welcoming, and meet the students' needs, staff needs. We're, just as an example, we're looking at probably a $14-15 million project just to roof our two main comprehensive high schools because they're 50-plus years old. We don't get maintenance funds from the state. I was working with David Hawk a while back when I first came to Tennessee in efforts to look at online gaming funds that could be dedicated and set aside for K-12 maintenance projects to keep the burden off our taxpayers, because the only way we have to fund some of those projects is to stand in front of my peers in the county and say we need more tax money. I'm a taxpayer too. I'm not a fan of big taxes. We're currently 9 3/4 in Hawkins County, which is on the high side of Tennessee, depending on where you live and what you're doing. To go to our taxpayers whose median income is roughly $49,000, $1,000 less than what we want to start each of our teachers out by 2026 statewide, to go to them and ask for more money to help roof and to maintain the basic infrastructure and safety required of our buildings to house our students safely each day, that does not seem equitable if we're talking about meeting the needs of our stakeholders. So I think that's one thing that we could be looking at that may help everybody in the room.
So I don't know that I can go back to Memphis-Shelby County Schools without ad-libbing on infrastructure. This year has been incredibly difficult, and I know you're a citizen of our county. Our buildings are so aged. If you look across our 160 school sites, more than half of them are over 100 years old. And so we're competing just each year for deferred maintenance. And so this particular year, we've had to take an opportunity to not fill our deferred maintenance needs at the opportunity where there was a new school that was proposed to be built, but that school has come about through the Germantown legislation where we lost 4 of our schools in that. So we, from a bipartisan view, we took the opportunity to say, hey, let's just figure out how do we solve this legislation. But of that came new school versus deferred maintenance. So it left our particular county in a really bad spot. And so throughout this year, you can pull the news articles. We had to close one of our most popular elementary schools where the ceiling fell in, where you had also mold and HVAC issues and just really repair. So just think about having 160 schools and trying to prioritize when there's announcements of teacher compensation and pay and trying to have competitiveness in a market where nationwide everyone's struggling to compete and retain and keep teachers versus roofing, HVACs over our facilities. Now we're looking internally, because my background is finance, right? Always for efficiencies, to your point, but the needs are so great sometimes that we're often prioritizing, is it a roof? Is it an HVAC? Is it something that relates to keeping teachers and ensuring that we are able to serve and move high-quality teachers into classrooms? And so I definitely want to point out and share, had an op-ed, but would love to share it with you all around some of the unique challenges that we're facing in our county where we really need these funds, additional funds.
Thank you. And so I'll say this, and does not require comment or answer from you all, but for me, it seems that the needs in the education arena, whether we're talking about rural or urban, east, west, or middle, are so high. And the burden, especially on our buildings, falls on our local governments, which in turn falls on our taxpayers. So on a state level, if there is any possibility where we have the financial situation to turn down $2 billion in federal funding and have to make that up in state funds, surely if we have that level of wealth or excess or surplus, that we could actually use those funds to make a difference in these school buildings. With a roof that's 50 years old, that roof is older than I am. With schools that are 100 years old, I mean, it's unthinkable. This is America. This is Tennessee. We say that we lead the nation, and we have kids who are in schools where roofs fall in, where schools that are achieving and accomplishing cannot stay open because of infrastructure. And these are not problems that the 4 of you all created. These are long-term problems. A roof not being replaced in 50 years is not something, sir, that you had created that problem. A 100-year-old school that's still open is not something that the current interim superintendent created. And so I think for us as a committee, we are investigating. We already said we're not going to cut. The beginning, I think the beginning statement was we're not looking to cut funds, we're looking to investigate how these funds are being used. And I think the other side of that is, how could we transform education in our state if we actually looked at this surplus that we allegedly have that will be able to cover federal funds that no other state has turned down? what could that do for our schools in our districts? And it's not a red district or a blue district or my district or your district. It really is education in this state. So thank you all.
For our panel, any other questions? Representative Reagan, you recognize, sir.
Thank you. I would like to address this to all of you again. My colleague there, Representative Slater, mentioned something about waste. You addressed that in part. I would specifically want to ask, is there a measure in place in each of your school districts to determine the amount of waste in that food program? And if there is, to whom does that get reported? Mr. Clay, go ahead and kick off.
Yes, sir. I'm trying to think if there's a specific way that we measure that. First of all, I want to give a shout out to our school nutrition team at MNPS. We got a chance to serve alongside of them recently. Had baked chicken the day that I was there. It was excellent, better than any baked chicken I could ever make. And serving 600 students in a 3-hour time period on $3 a meal is a pretty impressive feat. In terms of, I don't know the answer to that. I'll find out. That's a good question, and I appreciate you asking.
Ms. Williams?
All right, so same here, Representative Reagan. I'll find out specifically. I know the front-end options to prevent the waste and how we go up and approach kind of this offer and serve. But in terms of the actual measure on the back end to give you something quantifiable, I don't think that exists in any of our districts, I would say.
Dr. King?
No, sir, I can't answer that.
The only difference I would add is our staff, our school site staff frequent our nutrition services meals. They eat with the students a lot at a lot of our school sites. I think that testifies to the quality of the food that our nutrition services department create each day. I think to answer your specific question, observationally and informally, we look at the amount of food being served, what's eaten on an average and what's discarded, and then they adjust from there.
If I could, are you measuring it as opposed to just anecdotal?
No, sir. We don't have scales or devices at the trash cans, if that's what you're asking for. But we do observe what is taken to the trash, what is being dumped or discarded off the trays or out of the containers, and then those adjustments are made the next time. So, for example, if there's a full serving of green beans and 90% of those kids at that given day throw majority of that away, either the recipe needs to change or tweaks need to be made as discussed earlier, or they serve less of it based on what's truly eaten or discarded.
But again,
there's
nothing recorded. We have no document we can look back at and say, over time, this is how it worked.
No, sir, I'm unaware of any formal measuring device that measures the amount of food that's discarded.
Thank you.
Representative Glenn. I'm sorry, I had you on the list.
No, don't worry about it. Since you asked me to speak, I will. Don't worry about it. I guess my question to you all is, we seem to be stuck on the school nutrition program. Is there a string attached to how you report the amount of food kids take in? Is there something you have to report back to the federal side about?
The only thing is just the number of food or meals served per day.
So the number of meals per day?
Yeah, the breakfast meals. That's how they're doing the reimbursements to reimburse back.
Okay, so
Yes, sir.
all the federal string acts is that you tell them how many meals were served. Okay. So this ideal of how much was wasted, I mean, honestly, if we were so concerned with how much was wasted, we would have passed a bill to make lunch free for all students in the state of Tennessee. Then we could have asked that question. So I'm just concerned while we're concentrating on that one. That's all I have.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yes.
If I may address that as well, we do have programs to reuse food not eaten. We also have the grab and go from the tables that students, if they did not eat an apple, that they can share it with a friend and they can be able to take it with them. So I think that I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, and nutrition for kids is tricky. We want it to be healthy, we want it to be appetizing, but there are times that something that I thought she would want yesterday, she does not want today. So that is going to happen, especially at scale with that many students, but we're proud of the innovations that we have. And also, we talk a lot about the government side. I mean, there's a lot of partnership with private entities. I mean, these are private companies that are selling us these food items as part of the USDA program. And so I think there's been efficiencies built in over the years. In fact, there have to have been, because the rate at which they're reimbursing us for the meals has pretty much remained stagnant despite the inflation that we all know a lot about.
Thank you. Other questions from the body? Chair Lady Moody.
Okay, I know, it's been a while since I've been in school. So do the students, when they go through the line, do they get to refuse something, or is everything put on their tray?
Like the other directors up here have stated, there are generally choices for them to choose from that all meet the criteria that's set forth for nutritious meals. So they do get to choose. So if they don't like the green beans, there's an alternative there, generally speaking, for them to choose from.
Green beans are taking a hit today.
The recipe.
Tell you that.
I do
all in the
apologize for
recipe.
picking on green beans. But
It's all in the recipe.
I personally
right?
like them, so if that matters.
You should rack up then.
I'm sorry, by the way, for that. So, other comments from the body? So, I think, sir.
May I restate for Representative Slater? Over the past 3 years, I've been budgeting ESSER dollars into our federal dollars. And so that was an additional 34 million that I had in that number. So if you bag that out, that should get you the percent for our federal programs. I apologize. Okay.
Thank you all. I appreciate your time. So, and even though from Shelby County, I know the distance there. I know from Hawkins County, it's a lot further. So, and I think you've got an engagement that you've got to get to as well.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you. I unfortunately won't pass you today, but try to. I appreciate you all being here. If I can keep the committee together for just a moment, and I want to go off, not script, because there's no script, obviously, for any of these meetings, but candidly, we don't usually just talk amongst ourselves up here. And I'd like to get some guidance from you. I'm a little frustrated. And I say that because from the presentations that I heard, which were all great and informative, I get the feeling everybody that comes before us is defensive of why I've got to have this money. And try as I might, it's not about taking this money away. Our charge is about what is coming from the federal government. Do you have suggestions to me and Chair Lady Moody on how we get that? Because it's not one of those, it's not about the dollars, it's not about the Title I. I think it's outstanding what each of the people we've just heard from, where their priorities are, candidly isn't just from the federal government, it's from what just makes sense. It's the right thing to do. That's not what we're trying to change. And that's not what we've been called upon as a task force to investigate, but more candidly the role of the federal government, which is onerous as the state government can be. The federal government is much more so. And I'm trying not to create an us versus them. It's not about saying no and cutting $1 billion. There's no cuts that we're talking about. Help me out in how I convey that so we're not on the defensive. Senator Ackberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I noticed on the agenda that we're supposed to hear from the federal government tomorrow. So I think that could be helpful because no entity is able to answer the question of the strings that are attached that makes receiving federal funds burdensome. Because if we're saying we have to provide these services anyway, they have to come, if the federal government doesn't pay it, has to come from state dollars. I think that we need to know why we would make that decision. And I don't think that the people that we've called before us have the basis for that information because it's such a concept that's unheard of. It's completely unheard of for a state to reject those funds. And so the superintendents can't adequately answer that because it's a hypothetical they couldn't imagine. I think Sycamore provided the stats that they could provide, but there's so many unknowns because the federal government is a real entity we need to talk to. And so that would be my suggestion, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that we're talking about severing ties with. And so they have to tell us, what does that actually look like? Because otherwise, we're just speculating.
Yeah, yeah. I'll be curious when we get down to the local level and bring some of the school principals, and whether it's principals or teachers before us as well, and hear their input. Anyway, just open time. Representative Slater?
This morning, and I gained a lot from the Sycamore Institute and the facts and figures that they gave. I think that they're very reliable. One of the things that was brought up was the legal aspect of any type of decision that would be made in the future, and so I think that it really is a legal look. And perhaps if we, one of the statements that Sycamore made a couple of times was that, well, this will get sorted out in the courts. And so I think that we probably need a constitutional perspective, not just an administrative perspective from the federal government, but also a constitutional perspective. And so if we had that, I think that that may be helpful if we learned legal aspect. I don't think anyone would want to make decisions that would, be tied up in court immediately and in perpetuity either. So
We have NCSL, the National Council of State Legislatures, coming up. I believe it's next week, tomorrow. So, and I think because we talk about it being an anomaly that a state is looking at this. I think actually 3 or 4 have talked about it. I don't know that they've gone to the depth that we have and are right now, but hopefully Austin from NCSL can answer some of those very questions. So, any other comments? Representative Reagan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest that the messaging issue is at the heart of this from the standpoint of the assumption was made when word was put out that we were looking at rejecting federal dollars, that it was giving the dollars away and not replacing them. And that's still a pervasive assumption. You've made efforts when you've made the introductions here to try to counter that, but obviously it's still out there. The other piece of the puzzle that is not being emphasized, which some of our guests brought up, they have people in their offices that are dedicated to tracking these numbers because they have to report back to the federal government. Now, some of the tracking, they pointed out, is because of state rules, but since I sit on that committee where those state rules come through, I know that many times they bring it to the committee and say, we have to change this because the federal government will take money away if we don't. So the question on the table is, how much would it cost them, or how much would they save, rather, to do away with some of that tracking and just have if you will, streamlined approach to reporting to this body, to the executive branch, and them be able to take those people that were dedicated in 90% of the time, as was one I mentioned, and say, okay, you're not cut back, you only have to spend 25% of your time reporting to the state, so we could take the remainder of that person's time and put them to educating the students or some other activity. I think that's the message we need to go out with, and from the standpoint of saying we can make efficiencies, which has been brought up several times before, by taking people right now that are dedicated to tracking federal dollars and solely tracking federal dollars because they say we have to. And please understand, I'm not saying we don't need to worry about fraud, waste, and abuse. We do. That said, though, many of these tracking things are unrelated to that. They exist simply because somebody thought at the federal level it was a good idea, whether it is or not. So I suggest our message should be looking more towards efficiencies of the use of the people.
Well said. Well said. Anything else to come before? Without objection, then, we are adjourned.